Hello and welcome to the next episode for the e-commerce practitioners. This time I've got somebody very, very interesting with me, Marc Rickard, who's been working in various roles across various companies. And I wanted to bring along his diverse experience and how he handles e-commerce in his current role and his experience overall to see how he can help and guide and provide some wisdom into how things can be done better. Hi, Mark. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Vikram. I'm well, thank you.
Morning. I'm doing pretty well. Thank you. Welcome to the podcast and thank you for agreeing to do this.
My pleasure.
Yes. So, Mark, if we can just start with very quick introduction from your end and then we go on from that point.
Yeah, so I'm Mark. I'm currently the finance director of GAC, which is a musical instrument retailer. I'm been in the business for about 3 years, but my background is relatively unusual for a finance professional. I started off trained as an engineer by background and had a phase of my career working in retail banking as an analyst and in CRM, and worked then through a number of small businesses for around 20 years in various roles. And I've ended up in a finance role primarily because I've ended up in situations where I want to know what the answer is to a question and to try and drive some action. And often the only way to do that is to get stuck in and try and find the answers yourself. So I've ended up as the finance guy almost by accident over the years, but it brings a sort of more, well, I feel a more commercial view of finance than might be found through a traditional accounting role. It's not to belittle a traditional accounting role at all. And, if there are specialist requirements around, tax or more specific needs, then there are better qualified people in the world than I am to deal with that. But what I think I can bring is a commercial outlook, which is aligned with a financial view of things.
That's quite interesting, Mark. In fact, my background is I'm accidentally a technology guy.
Right.
I did commerce by education, but I ended up doing technology. It just piqued my fancy and I just got into it. And now I've been doing that for 26 years. Okay, coming back to yourself. So I think that's a very interesting journey. And how do you think this whole diverse experience across IT, commercial roles, finance, how has this all shaped your approach towards the e-commerce world overall?
Well, unsurprisingly, it means I take a fairly analytical, numbers-based approach. And I think e-commerce, it's a very broad term. It can mean a lot of different things. I think from my perspective, my focus and my involvement in e-commerce has been where the numbers are. So primarily around digital marketing in particular. And again, there are elements of digital marketing and e-commerce more generally that you need to have a breadth of skills for. You need to have a marketing expert to help with your creative design and so on. But there is also a strategic and sort of analytical element to it, which I think aligns quite closely with what a finance professional does in understanding, particularly in our world of product-based e-commerce, having a clear understanding of acquisition cost, having a clear understanding of what you can afford to pay for a customer, how much you should be paying for a customer, and how much you shouldn't be paying for a customer. And it's very easy to lose track of that sometimes in the buzz of e-commerce. And, there's 1,001 solutions for every problem, but actually having a real understanding of does this actually stack up is critical.
Absolutely. And out of interest, what do you think is the uniqueness about the e-commerce in the musical industry space? Because that's your current role, current company that you work for. I believe that is where it would be good for us to understand what is so unique about the e-commerce in the musical industry.
It's an unusual space to be in. If you think about a musician, a musician can mean a lot of things as well, right? So we have a huge variety of SKUs, products that we offer, both in terms of price point. We might be selling many thousands of pounds, high-end, limited edition electric guitars, acoustic guitars, bass guitars, highly desirable products, through sort of mid-range products, DJ equipment's really popular right now, through to, a plectrum for your guitar or any strings for a pound or two. So getting your digital marketing to work across that range of price point is very challenging. it's a challenging margin business as well. You know, if you're working in a high margin luxury brand retail space and your acquisition cost isn't quite right, you're probably not going to feel it too badly. If we get our acquisition costs wrong, it hurts, and we know about it. So actually managing that, a low margin across a range of products and price points, and also the buyer journey for a lot of those products is very difficult. It's very different. If you're in the market for a high-end electric guitar, you've probably thought about it for a while. You're probably, looking around, you're Googling, you're looking at what's your passions and what are you getting really excited about. It's probably going to take you some weeks, months, years, maybe, to save and decide what you want. If you want a pack of strings, you probably need it tomorrow because your guitar isn't working. So, the e-commerce journey is different for a lot of our different products. And I'm certainly not claiming we mastered all of that because it's complex. But trying to understand all of that, I think this maybe comes back to the analytical approach. Trying to understand all of that gives you at least an idea of how to try and tackle it. And you may or may not be successful. Test and learn is key, isn't it? If you're able to try a strategy and figure out that something doesn't work, well, that's useful, and it gets you on the journey to figuring out what does work.
And is there a huge amount of brand sensitivity or brand loyalty within the world of the music instruments, or people just look more from budget perspective?
It varies again. So again, with certainly with high-end electric guitars, I'd say yes, there is. Some of the high-end brands are very desirable, and you might be a Fender guy or a Gibson guy, and that's probably your brand. Again, I talked about DJ equipment. There are some popular brands there that have a certain desirability, and also a sort of standard in a club DJ booth setup. So you would expect those more premium brands to be desirable. That said, they come at a cost. So there are cheaper brands that can offer great value as well, and it depends where somebody is in their journey. If you're an aspiring musician in your early 20s, you're probably not in the market for a £3,000 guitar, and you'd be happy to start off on the journey. But as you progress, then there will be people who reach the point where that desirability is important.
Absolutely. And you mentioned about the low margin being one of the factors of the whole business. So how do you manage the overall profitability or balance profitability in the e-commerce, especially around the price competitiveness and people being able to look around for products across online so easily?
Well, it's
how do you manage?
Sorry, Vikram. Yeah, it's undeniably difficult. We are selling the same products as other retailers.
Yes.
So we talk about a sort of golden triangle of requirements to be able to compete effectively. One is you've got to market it, and you need to market it cost effectively. Two is it needs to be in stock. If it's in stock, you can't ship it. And three is you need to price it right. And if you're even a small amount out of where the market is, that can have a significant impact on your volumes. Because as you just noted, it's a fairly open marketplace out there. You can see very quickly and clearly what their prices are. So you've got to be in the right place. We essentially try to compete on service and on brand, able to promise that we do a good job of making our customers happy, shipping what we said we were going to ship, shipping it on time, dealing with any customer service issues quickly and efficiently. And we also have an interaction between what we do online and what we do in our store in Brighton. So we have a store which has a quite wide range of stock, and it's a different experience to buying online. Now, somebody may come into the shop, try some stuff out, engage with a particular brand or a particular guitar, and may choose to buy it online. But there's definitely a sort of omni-channel interaction there that I think is also important. And clearly, there is a catchment area that our store attracts people from, although it's probably bigger than you might expect. But people that can get to the store have a really engaging experience with what we sell.
That's very interesting. You mentioned the word omni-channel, and I think a lot of businesses tend to either overuse that word but not apply it and not balance it out properly. How do you balance out your investments from the perspective of managing investments into the digital operations and the offline stores Do you think if you were to make a huge overhaul in the business, you would put in a huge chunk of money into the digital side or in the offline stores? Or would you eliminate one of those channels to improve the other one? What are your thoughts around that?
I mean, I think it's getting harder and harder to get bricks and mortar stores to work. The cost challenges are significant and will become more significant again in April. So it is a huge challenge to manage that. That said, I think if you, as I was just sort of alluding to, if you don't have that omni-channel, you say people use that word a lot, but essentially, if you don't have a store to complement your website, you're losing the ability to engage with customers in a different way. Now, your store experience has to be great, and we're lucky that we sell products that people generally think are interesting and desirable. So there's a reason to come and engage with those products. But it has to be an experience that's memorable. In terms of investment and growth, I think our route will be to continue to grow the digital side of things more aggressively than the store side of things. But we'll see.
But you would still want to keep your store to offer their experience to the customers, right?
For sure.
But stores would always have a little bit of a local reach rather than a global reach, whereas digital operations would always give you global reach. But at the end of the day, I think what stores do is they also offer a huge trust in a brand, a trust in a business from a subconscious perspective. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, I would, and I think that's reinforced when not everyone's heard of us when they're in the market. Particularly new customers won't have heard of us, but as many people do, when you research a company, you Google them, and you find out who they are and are they real. And actually, the first thing you find out about GAC is that there is a store in Brighton, and people like it. It's real. It's credible. So I do think it reinforces the digital proposition as well.
And any plans, do you think it would help in strengthening the brand to open up stores across UK in some form and shape, maybe small stores or something like that, something of those lines?
I think it would. I think that the challenges of managing a multiple store operation where sort of by necessity they end up being quite geographically dispersed are not to be underestimated. Running a single store operation where management can be in the store very easily and keeping the essence of the store where it needs to be is one thing. Trying to manage even half a dozen stores across,
Absolutely.
even across the UK, it would be challenging. I'm sure it would be beneficial, but it's also then about a lot of fixed costs in your business. The rent, the rate, the headcount, and all of those stores then have to perform. That's clearly a challenge in the markets, in the market that we're in at the moment, and the wider economic position that we're in at the moment. It is tough to run any retail operation.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. But at the same time, I also think retails take a lot more investment. But I think at the end of the day, the hybrid approach of doing offline and the online offers a much more comprehensive experience to the customers, a much better experience, because then they can engage with the brand a bit better and offers credibility, as you also mentioned. Now, I think you mentioned the data side of it quite a few times. So what role does data play in all those operations that you do, all the strategies that you devise? From a marketing perspective, I think your official role is primarily around finance director. That's your official role. But you definitely get involved in the whole marketing side of it, customer acquisition side of it, which traditionally would be not really completely outside, but traditionally would be outside the boundaries of finance director per se. There would be input, but it wouldn't be within your realm of day-to-day engagement. How are you utilizing data? What exactly is your workflow of going through that data and making those decisions? How do you do that?
So you're right, it's an unusual setup, and it's sort of arisen really by the need to try and, in a former role, when I was working in retail banking, the department that I worked in was called marketing and analysis. And it was quite an unusual setup. Most banks don't work that way. They talk about marketing, they talk analysis, and the two may interact. But in this particular organization I worked in, the two were combined. And I guess that's been ingrained in me since very early in my career, but I think it has a very important logic to it, which is you need to have a creative and marketing driven approach, but it needs to be justifiable. There needs to be some sort of attempt to quantify return, and those are different skill sets. So you need different people with different skill sets working together. So although I do look after, and it's probably become apparent already from what I've been saying, the sort of more analytical side and performance-based side of things, I'm certainly not the creative guy. So we still depend on a marketing team, both internal and external. But I see my role as making sure, I guess, the custodian of the pound, right? It's making sure that the pound is being wisely spent, or at least we're trying to quantify that we think it's being wisely spent, which is sometimes the best you can get. And looking to make sure that where it isn't, that we're trying other strategies. So we've been on a number of different initiatives over the last few years in terms of trying different marketing approaches. Some have worked better than others, but it's trying to quantify, do we think we're actually making a return here, and trying to figure out that every marketing pound that we spend is generating a particular return.
Yeah. And what is your typical workflow for doing that, Mark? If I could try to put it down more like a process or a workflow. This is the data we're going to go through. This is what we're going to analyze. This is the output we expect. You necessarily don't need to share the numbers, but would be good to get an understanding of a little bit of around the workflow that you go through, let's say on a review perspective, and how do you go about doing that?
Yeah.
Data sources and everything around that.
Yeah, I mean, it starts really with understanding product profitability. So, if you're looking at a £3,000 electric guitar and a £1 pack of strings, even at the same percentage margin, that the pound profit you make on those two sales are very different. So it starts with trying to understand how we're going to segment our product range in a sensible way. And again, one of the challenges with Google and PMax in particular that we've struggled with is trying to balance the black box approach of Google and its need for data with trying to get it to perform in a way that makes sense. And you don't have very much control over PMax, which I think is a real challenge when you've got such a wide range of price point and inventory and actually just volume of sales. Some of these high-end electric guitars we don't sell many of, so it is challenging to do that. And that's been part of the sort of review, the process of trying to figure out what's the right segmentation here, what works economically and what works for Google, and trying to get the two to align. And then we start with a segmentation of some sort, and then try and lay out some financial objectives about what do we think the average margin would be of those products. What do we think, therefore, that the investment that we can make is as a percent of revenue? So what's our marketing investment as a percent of revenue that we can afford? And then try and lay out the campaign to respond in a way that generates that objective. So usually we get to a point where we know, okay, well, we've got this particular group of products. They've got this level of profitability. We can afford to invest X percent of our margin in marketing. So that tells us we need to achieve a ROAS of, 8, pick a number. So it starts with understanding what you're trying to achieve. The difficult bit, in my experience, is then delivering what you're trying to achieve in a consistent way. And as I say, I think it's got harder with PMax over the last 2 or 3 years because of the degree of control available to you. But at least if you've got to know where you're trying to get to. If you don't know where you're trying to get to, then you'll never know whether you've got there.
Absolutely. So defining your objectives, finding the right product fitment or product segmentation, and then defining the financial objectives against each product segment as well.
Yeah.
And then working towards that, analyzing the data, what is leading to what. That's absolutely brilliant. I think that's literally gold dust. Then you mentioned about some marketing initiatives in the last comment, and I wanted to understand what are the different marketing initiatives that you think might have worked, that you've executed in the past. Some of them would have worked, some of them may not have worked. And what exactly has your learnings been? How are you bringing that feedback back into the business from a process perspective and learning from those initiatives?
It's a good question. It's often very difficult to understand what has and hasn't worked, if because there's such a lot of complexity in the digital marketing space, and so actually trying to figure out the cause and effect sometimes is quite difficult. One thing that always sticks with me is from a previous role, actually, where I think A/B. I talked about test and learn. I think A/B testing is an important thing to try and do within reason. I caveat that with I'm a skeptic about testing whether a red button works better than a blue button, but I think there is some value in understanding whether meaningful changes can drive performance uplift. But changing the color of a button, I don't know, it might make a small difference, but it's unlikely to be a game changer. I remember doing an email campaign to test in a previous business, and we tested discounts. So one discount was you had to spend £50 and you'd get 5% off your order, or spend £100 and get 10% off your order. And we tested that alongside spend £50 and get £5 off your order, and spend £100 and get £10 off your order. So basically the same discount.
Yes.
And I thought that the percentage would work better, right? Because economically, with my analytical head on, you'd say, well, if I'm going to spend over £100 and get 10% off the whole order, I'm going to be better off, right? If I only get £10 for £150 order, as a percentage, I'm getting less of a saving. But it didn't work that way. We got a significant uptake in discounts where people took the £5 or the £10 offer.
Wow.
And obviously, we as a business were better because we were offering a smaller percentage discount. So the average spend on the £50 voucher was actually something like £75, and we were only offering £5 off. So it's a smaller percentage discount than would have otherwise been achieved. So I thought it was a really interesting example of where the rational thing is not always the right thing. My conclusion is consumers don't like percentages, right? They like pounds off. They understand pounds in your pocket, whereas a percentage is kind of as a finance professional, I percentages, but but clearly in the real world, people prefer to know they're going to get a particular pound saving. So understanding that sort of dynamic, I think, is a helpful insight, because it's something that you can actually apply and that would go against your rational instinct.
That is a very interesting one, actually. I mean, if I look at it from my perspective, yes, of course, I would go for percentage, but I think trying to retrospectively think about what could have led to people going for pounds more, because probably there's an additional step of calculating the percentage on that total amount, and which people by default subconsciously are not doing it. And they just like the final output. Okay, I'm just saving £10. Let's just go for that straight away.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah. The emotional appeal of having, knowing it's £10 is a bigger draw.
Yeah, that's a very interesting, actually, outside, not inside, output that came out of that, an insight from there. I think that was a very interesting one. And we talked about bit around the omni-channel element. Now, how do you integrate your offerings across offline, online? Is there some element of seamless integration in terms of promotions, in terms of customer loyalty? And do you think any of those adds value to that whole business proposition, or how does it work for your business?
So we have a bespoke ERP that works across both our online offering and our store offering. So we have as close to what as to what we think is a single customer view as we can get. It's not perfect. I'm not sure there's a perfect system out there.
There is no perfect system in the world.
But we have a reasonable understanding of what our customers are buying, both online and in store, and, repeat orders and so forth. So that's very helpful. But beyond that, I think there's not a huge amount more that we do right now that is integrated across the two operations. I think loyalty is an interesting area, which we've talked about several times. And it would be really interesting to implement something around loyalty. And again, in terms of, you talked about competing in the space that we're in, I think it would be a helpful tool, but it comes with some complexity that needs thinking about.
Do you tend to push one channel across the other channel? So, for example, if somebody's walked into a store, you will try to build or have a conversation with them, and somehow do a little bit of an upselling of going digital with your website itself? Or if somebody's come online, somebody's local, and you try to incentivize them in some form and shape to come and visit the store, are there some kind of initiatives done explicitly, or is it all just left as is?
But we let the customer do what they want to do. I mean, customers will sometimes come into store and buy a guitar, but they want it shipped. So it will effectively go through our e-commerce business processes for that fulfillment. It's kind of, a reverse click and collect almost, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, and similarly, someone can order online and come into store and collect it. So there is some interaction both ways. Bigger, bulkier, heavier products in particular, customers will be less inclined to purchase in store and may prefer to have delivered.
Yeah, because that's much easier.
Yeah.
Indeed. Of course. You'd mentioned that you have a very vast product catalog overall. If I could ask, what is the typical volume of your product catalog? At about 25,000 SKUs, 50,000?
Like that. No, in the 20s.
In the 20s, okay. And how do you manage? So it's all managed within your bespoke ERP, and how does that data management, data quality, do you have any internal processes around how do you manage around your product data and ensure that the content, because I think in the music instrument space, people would like to research, and that research is driven by the content of the product. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we have a dedicated team of buyers who are responsible for sourcing products, both, replenishing existing products and sourcing new products. So obviously from time to time, there are new products being launched, in the market. So those buyers will engage with the suppliers and look to ensure that new product, that product is launched on a page with, new copy, photography, pricing, our Google feed is, updated and optimized accordingly. And then that's a sort of ongoing process then of periodically reviewing that copy, obviously reviewing pricing very frequently. And we do use some automation for tracking pricing, and sometimes revising copy if needed. So it's down to that team really as to how they want to best handle. I think once a product is launched, it doesn't need a huge amount of attention other than making sure that it's in stock, it's marketed, and it's priced.
And what are the typical challenges in maintaining your overall product content? So, for example, once the product comes in, somebody's writing the copy. I'm assuming somebody's going to be reviewing that copy as well. And then it goes through that. So are there ways and mechanisms and processes through which you could potentially verify the accuracy of the data that's been put across? Of course, pricing is another element which is probably reviewed by multiple stakeholders before it goes live. But besides the pricing, all the other bits, how does that go through from an accuracy check, comprehensiveness, and relevance as well, which is a very important factor?
Yeah, I mean, it's down to those buyers. A lot of the products that we buy are quite technical in what they, particularly I'm thinking about the sort of studio equipment, electronic kit. It's very technical in terms of the interfaces and specifications and the interoperability between other pieces of hardware. So getting all of that information right is important, and you need skilled people to do that. We've experimented with, ChatGPT and AI solutions to help with some of that. And it has a role. We're cautious about it, particularly with new products, actually, because you don't want something made up, right? It's easy for inaccuracies to slip in there. So for new products in particular, it is a bit risky. But, we rely on that team of buyers to make sure those product pages are good quality.
Yeah, absolutely. I think eventually, no matter what level of AI comes in, I think there is always going to be a significant element of verification and people involvement to ensure that you're delivering the right value and the right content to the customers. Now, from a product content perspective, is that content in some form and shape utilized within the retail stores as well, or is it just utilized on the digital platforms?
It's just on the digital platforms.
It's just on the digital platform. There is almost zero relevance from a retail store perspective.
Well, it's relevant. I mean, somebody may come into store, speak to one of our sales assistants and have a particular technical query about a product. And in that instance, that would be the first place to refer to, the product page on our website. Or indeed, the customer might well do that themselves on the website in the store. So there's a resource there. But generally, I think when someone's coming into store, it's because they either want to talk to someone about a particular product or they want to see the product. It's probably both. So the information that's on those product pages is probably less relevant in the stores, unless there's a particular technical query.
Now, I think moving on to the next topic is around the Black Friday and the peak trading. How relevant is Black Friday in the music instrument industry or space?
Yeah, it's key trading period.
So it is the key trading period, yeah. And how do you prepare typically? And of course, it brings its own set of challenges. How do you prepare for it from a perspective of financial, operational, logistics, and let's say digital website scale up and all of that and preparedness? How do you go about doing all of this preparedness? How do you figure all of that out?
Well, Black Friday changes in its sort of nature every year.
Every year,
it
yes.
Started as a day. It became a weekend. It's now best part of 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, it's gradually expanding into the whole month.
Yeah. So that in itself is a challenge, because planning for, one day or one weekend of frenzied trading activity is one thing. Planning for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks of probably less frenzied but more protracted trading is quite tough. I mean, we try to plan ahead as best as we can, and that involves, you need a reason for people to come and engage with you in Black Friday. So it starts with deals, right? You need to think about what your offer is, what your reason is for somebody to buy the thing that they've probably been watching for a while. So we think about what we can do there. We try and forecast what we think our sales run rates will be for that period, plan stock accordingly, albeit again, with particular breadth of SKUs that we have in the business, that's quite challenging too. We try and get the balance right between maintaining enough inventory that we don't stock out, but equally not tying up excess cash in inventory that isn't going to sell. So I'm not sure there's a magic answer other than, some spreadsheets and some modeling. I think it's back to what I said at the start of this discussion, that you kind of have to have a starting point. You have to have a baseline. Costs are almost always wrong, right? But at least if you've got something you're measuring against, whether or not you were better or worse than what you thought you were going to
be. Yeah. And so that's one side is the financial planning. Second is offer planning that you've done, inventory planning that you've done. I think two of the biggest challenges that I've seen a lot of times is the logistical challenges, which a lot of times are beyond your control. How do you prepare or plan for that? And then other one that I've seen faltering a lot is the customer service side of it. Because at this point of time, the customer service volume just goes through the roof. And so does your logistical shipment, courier, and all of that. I mean, just recently, I think Yodel stopped generating any labels altogether. So how do you plan, prepare? A lot of times you just have to manage around all of these. So what are the discussion points around these, and how do you go about handling these?
Well, I mean, the starting point is to, you look at what happened last year and try and iterate whether or not you think you're going to be in the same situation this year. I mean, I don't really have any particular operational responsibility in the role that I'm doing at the moment, but I have in previous businesses, and, it is, you learn from getting it wrong. So if you're expecting a normal weekend of phone calls on Black Friday, then you're gonna fail. So it starts with understanding, what volume of phone calls you're going to get, what volume of emails you're going to get, trying to plan ahead in terms of making sure that people are on the phones early and throughout the period. But, being able to meet your demand is the starting point. Similarly, in terms of logistics, the warehousing operation needs to be probably a couple of hours behind the ordering, but needs to work later. So and it's important in terms of dealing with couriers in particular to make sure that you're either pushing your last pickup as late as possible, or probably ordering an extra collection midway through the afternoon to make sure that you're clearing your dispatch orders out of your warehouse as best as you can. And then customer service, again, it's, understanding, well, we're going to get some issues. We're going to get some returns. There will be delivery issues. Understandably, a very busy period for the couriers as well. So if you have to expect that and try and resource accordingly.
And how do you scale up sporadically then for customer service side of it? Because I've seen a lot of businesses, what they do is they do outsourcing and various approaches people have used. I've seen what approach do you typically use from a scaling up operation just during these 2 months?
I think for small businesses, that's quite a challenge. You don't necessarily have easy ways of flexing resource. It's probably more about building some goodwill with your team and trying to give a little in exchange for taking a little. So, asking people to work some extra hours or through a weekend in exchange for, what you would generally find before Black Friday is a period where it's a bit quieter. So potentially there is a way of trying to, flex or manage your resource throughout that period accordingly. But it means you need people to be willing and flexible.
Absolutely. So keeping that touch of human within that business element as well to ensure that you're able to manage the scaling up demand during this particular peak period. I think that's phenomenal, valuable advice. And now let's moving on to the next bit, which is pretty much the last bit. We are in the last leg for our conversation, Mark. Where do you see the future? What do you see as the future of overall retail, e-commerce, offline, online, AI? None of the conversations today are relevant without bringing in the buzzword of Gen AI. Where do you see all of this going? And how do you see all of these trends shaping up the world of commerce?
It's a big big area, isn't it?
Here.
I think we touched on this earlier. I think I don't see there being one way forward, which is just digital. I think there's always going to need to be, or at least for most businesses, there will need to be a combination of channels. There will be some degree of offline retail as well. I mean, whether that has to necessarily be stores, there might be different ways of looking at retail space, because I think the experience side of things will become more and more important, whatever sector you're in. And, as I described in terms of people going into the shop and then asking for it to be delivered, I think there's probably a direction of travel for that more and more. So there's clearly an interaction there. People want to engage with product. And so the overall experience is critical. I think continuing to integrate, we talked about a single view of customer. That's really important, trying to understand your customers and segment them in a way that is meaningful to them, and then offering them great value, rewards, loyalty, all of that I think is very easy to say, harder to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Easier said than done.
Yeah. But it's, if you can get it right, I think that's a tremendous opportunity. AI is interesting. I think AI is really exciting. I feel my instinct is we're sort of in the world, in sort of the early 2000s right now, after Web 1.0, or maybe even still in Web 1.0. And we haven't quite got to Web 2.0, which was a whole load better, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's, clearly some interesting things that AI can do, but we're already seeing challenges in terms of, the limitations that it has in terms of what you train it on, and the quality of the output, and knowing whether the output is reliable, and so on and so forth. So I think it will be very interesting. I think there will definitely be opportunities in terms of quality content generation in due course, although I don't think we're there yet. And I think in terms of customer service, again, right now, I find the bot solutions pretty frustrating as a consumer, but I can see where they might get to if it genuinely becomes an easier way to get your problem solved than being on hold to someone for 20 minutes. That's a win. But if, at the moment, a lot of the time, you don't get your problem solved, and then you've wasted 15 minutes, and then you end up on hold to someone anyway. So I think that it has to solve the consumer's problem. And I think at the moment it's not necessarily doing that efficiently. And then the final area, I think, is composable commerce. So I think, the more technologies evolve and the more different solutions are available out there, the more important it is to be able to try and tap into what's best in breed. And, having a tech stack that enables you to do that without being locked into one single provider is going to be more and more important.
That's a very interesting thing, very interesting topic, and probably would require one full podcast episode for that itself, dedicated to that concept. There could be a huge debate from both sides on both elements, different elements. Nevertheless, any other area you think Gen AI could help besides, let's say, product content, quality content generation, doing your customer service, and let's say, how about potentially, your financial predictions or data modeling for your financial projections? Do you see that Gen AI could potentially help in that space?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it will get there. I would feel natural nervousness right now about letting it do that. I think where it's really helpful is as a sort of source of stimulation, as a means of generating discussion points or, considerations that can help a management team engage with, discuss around, come up with strategies, solutions, plans, and so forth, rather than actually doing that itself. Because I don't think I wouldn't be confident that the quality of what's coming out of that was reliable.
Yeah. I think it's a little bit far off from being totally reliable, but I think it's gonna, next 2 to 5 years are gonna be very, very interesting from how the whole Gen AI piece or space evolves and its use cases. I think the biggest challenge is going to be, I honestly believe the problem of finding answers is gone, and the bigger problem has come, which is asking the right questions.
Yeah.
Which is what your whole prompt engineering is, because now answers are all there. Reliability, accuracy is a different subject, but now it's about asking the right questions. And I think that's where it's going to make a huge difference. And because it's all democratized now. Anyways, I think it's been absolutely wonderful, Mark. And any advice, by the way, before we close, any advice would you like to give to people who are, let's say, starting digital commerce, who are doing Omni-channel, and anything that you've learned from your experience of 20 plus years that they should be doing more, focusing more on, and not doing something specific?
I think there's no substitute for doing. So, I've learned what I've learned in e-commerce through doing, through reading, through talking to people. There's a point at which you need to then delegate it and find people to work with you. But actually, if you don't know what you're doing, ultimately, you don't know whether it's working, you don't know what's possible, you don't know whether you should be trying something different. I strongly believe that by doing, learns.
That is the most wonderful thought, Mark, because this whole podcast I started for the people who are the doers. So that's why it's called the e-commerce practitioner. I think that was a beautiful closing thought. Thank you so much, Mark, for that wonderful conversation and sharing your wisdom and insights from your so many years of experience. I think it's been valuable, and I think our listeners are also going to find it extremely valuable. And in case somebody wants to reach out, I'm sure they can find you on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Mark.
Lovely to talk to you, Vikram.